In the Kowloon district of Hong Kong on a Tuesday night in October of 1964, the air above Nathan Road was still carrying the day's heat at 11:43 in the evening. The neon signs burned their reflections into the wet pavement below. The restaurants had closed their kitchens an hour earlier. The last of the tram cars had made its final run south. What remained on the street at that hour were the men who had nowhere else to be, and the men who were exactly where they intended to be. There were 14 of them gathered in the narrow courtyard behind the Mongkok Athletic Hall, a space no wider than 30 feet across, bounded on three sides by concrete walls painted a shade of green that had been fading since the colonial administration put it there in 1952. Bare bulbs hung on a wire strung between two iron hooks. One of the bulbs had burned out and not been replaced. The light that remained fell unevenly, favoring one side of the courtyard and leaving the other in a partial shadow that the men standing there seemed to prefer. The man who had called this gathering was named Raymond Chow, not the film producer, a different man entirely, though they shared the same family name and roughly the same city. This Raymond Chow was 26 years old, stood 5 feet 11 inches and weighed 211 pounds at a time when that was an unusual weight for a Cantonese man of his generation. He had come up through the rooftop fighting circuits that operated across Sham Shui Po and Yau Ma Tei in the years after the war, circuits with no rules, no judges, and no record of what happened in them beyond the memory of the men who attended. He had competed in 31 of those encounters. He had not lost any of them. He had, in 3 separate instances, sent men to the hospital at Queen Elizabeth for periods of 2 to 4 weeks. In 1962, he had placed second in an open-weight full-contact tournament held in Macau that drew competitors from the Philippines, Japan, Taiwan, and Thailand. Second because the man who finished above him came from a Muay Thai lineage that stretched back 4 generations and had been fighting professionally since the age of 15. Chow had put that man on the ground twice before losing on points in the final exchange. His left hand generated 390 pounds of force per square inch on impact, a figure measured by a physician with a dynamometer at the request of a promoter who was considering him for exhibition matches in 1963. He had been told about the school on Hoi An Street. He had been told the name of the man who taught there. He had expressed at a table in a restaurant on Argyle Street 3 weeks before this night a specific opinion about what he would find if he went there. He had expressed it in front of 7 witnesses. He had said that what was being taught on Hoi An Street was a performance. He had said that a man who learned to move like that would be less prepared for what happened in a real encounter than a man who had learned nothing at all. He had said that the teacher of that school had built a reputation on students who had never faced anyone serious. He was not a fool. He was not reckless. What he was at 26 years old with 31 fights and no losses was certain. Certainty of that particular kind carries its own specific weight. It bends the way a man holds himself. It determines the hour at which he chooses to make his position known. He had sent word through an intermediary. The intermediary had delivered the word. The word had been received. And so here they were, 14 men in a courtyard behind a building in Mongkok at 11:43 on a Tuesday night in October, waiting for one more person to arrive. In the next 19 seconds, Raymond Chow would throw 5 techniques. 4 of them were among the best he had ever thrown, and they would all miss by distances that had nothing to do with luck. Nobody standing in that courtyard understood what they were about to see. None of them would forget it for the rest of their lives. The man who walked through the gate at 11:47 wore a plain white shirt, dark trousers, and shoes that were not fighting shoes. He was 23 years old. He stood 5 feet 7.5 inches. He weighed 141 pounds. He carried nothing. He did not look at the walls or the wire or the men arranged along them. He looked at Raymond Chow. He stopped 8 feet from him. He put his hands in his pockets. If you want to know what happened in the next 4 minutes, make sure you are subscribed and drop a comment below telling us where you are watching from tonight. Raymond Chow looked at the man across from him for a long moment. Then he said, loud enough for the 14 men to hear, "You are smaller than I expected. The people who told me about you did not mention that." The man in the white shirt said nothing. He stood with his hands still in his pockets, his weight distributed across both feet, his shoulders neither raised nor dropped. He looked at Chow the way a man looks at an object he is measuring. Chow said, "I want to know if what you teach works. I want to know tonight. If it does not, you should stop teaching it. because you are sending men out with less than they came to you with." The man in the white shirt took his hands out of his pockets. He rolled the left sleeve of his shirt up to the elbow, then the right. He did not crack his knuckles, he did not set his feet in a fighting stance, he stood in a way that looked, to most of the men watching, like he was simply standing. He said, "Show me what you have." What a fight is, and what most men believe a fight to be, are two different things. Most men believe a fight is an exchange of force. They believe that the man with more force, applied more accurately, wins. That understanding is not wrong. It is simply the second lesson. The first lesson, the one that comes before everything else, is this. A fight is a negotiation about space. It is a conversation conducted without words about who controls the distance between two bodies. Every technique ever developed in every fighting tradition in every country in human history is, at its root, an attempt to manage that distance in the practitioner's favor. The man who controls the space controls the encounter. Raymond Chow understood this. He had built 31 victories on it. What he had not encountered, in 31 encounters, was a man for whom the management of space was not a strategy but a reflex. A man who had internalized distance control to a level below conscious decision. A man who did not calculate. A man who simply knew, the way a person knows the temperature of water before a thermometer confirms it. That was the first thing. Raymond Chow came forward with his right hand. He had thrown this punch 4,000 times in training. He threw it at 232 pounds of force, a figure lower than his maximum but accurate at distance, the kind of punch that a working fighter throws when he is not trying to end a moment but to begin one, to establish range, to read the response. There was no response to read. The man in the white shirt was no longer where he had been. He had not stepped back. He had moved laterally, 2 feet to the right, in a motion so compact that several of the men watching would later say they had not seen him move. They had seen Chow's hand extend. They had seen empty air at the end of it. They had seen the man in the white shirt standing 2 feet to the right of where he had been, his weight already resettled, his hands at the same height they had been at before. He had moved without announcement. He had moved without expression. He had already returned to stillness before Chow's arm had fully retracted. A man named George Lamb was standing at the eastern wall. He had been a referee in the Macau tournament where Chow finished second. He had seen, in that capacity, several hundred exchanges between skilled men. When Chow's punch reached empty air, Lamb set both his hands flat on the wall behind him. He did not move them for the next 3 minutes. Chow did not pause. He stepped forward again. This time with a combination, the right hand followed immediately by a left hook thrown from a lower angle, the kind of combination that catches men who manage the first punch and assume the danger is past. He had ended 2 of his 31 fights with this combination. Both men had gone down and not gotten up before the count was done. The man in the white shirt slipped the right hand by rotating his torso 4 inches to the left. The left hook arrived a fraction later and found the same result. A 4-inch rotation in the opposite direction initiated at a moment that preceded Chow's shoulder rotation by what witnesses later estimated as somewhere between a quarter and a half second. He had read the combination before it was thrown. He had not moved backward. He had not raised his arms. He had not blocked. He had simply been somewhere the punches were not, both times, and both times returned to his starting position in the interval between the strikes. Chow stopped. This was new information. He was processing it. The man who had accompanied Chow to the courtyard, a fighter from Chung Sha Wan named Patrick Wei, was standing at the wall across from Lamb. Wei had seen Chow in 31 encounters, several of them in the rooftop circuits where the lighting was poor and the rules were non-existent. He had never seen Chow's combinations miss, not both of them, not like that. Wei did not move from his position at the wall. He later said that he had, in that moment, stopped understanding what he was watching, that it had taken him several seconds to accept what his eyes had given him. The courtyard was completely silent. The sound from Nathan Road, 4 blocks south, had continued without interruption. A bus. A motorbike. Someone laughing in a window above the alley to the west. The world outside the courtyard had not noticed that anything was happening. Chow came forward a 3rd time. He threw a kick. A powerful round kick aimed at the outside of the left thigh. The kind of kick that does not need to end a fight to change it, that accumulates damage and degrades mobility and makes everything that follows easier. He had strong legs. He had thrown this kick in 8 of his 31 fights. It had landed in 7 of them. The man in the white shirt checked it, not with his shin, the way most men in that era and that tradition would have. With his knee rotated inward at the precise angle required to redirect the force rather than absorb it, while simultaneously closing the distance by 6 inches. The effect was that the kick lost its power on contact, and the man who had kicked was now 6 inches closer to the man he had kicked at than he had intended to be. That 6 inches mattered. From 6 inches away and from the position created by the check, the man in the white shirt struck Chow once, in the sternum, with the heel of his right palm. He did not strike hard. He struck accurately. He struck at a precise point on the sternum that the practitioner's tradition identified as a specific location, a point that, struck at the correct angle with the correct surface, produced a particular interruption of the body's ability to continue at full capacity. The force was not remarkable. The placement was. Raymond Chow stepped back. His breathing changed. Not dramatically. Not in a way that most of the 14 men could see in the uneven light. But George Lamb, the former referee, saw it. The chest movement that comes when a strike has reached something beneath the muscle and the technique. Lamb's hands, already flat against the wall, did not move. Chow came forward a 4th time, because a man with 31 fights and no losses does not stop with the information he has. He comes forward to get more. He threw his right hand again, this time lower than before, aimed not at the head but at the center line, a feint toward the body designed to bring the hands down and create an opening above. The man in the white shirt did not bring his hands down. He did not take the feint. He was not where the right hand was aimed. He stepped forward into the space that the feint had vacated, and as he stepped he placed his left forearm against Chow's right forearm from the outside. Not a block, a redirection. A movement that used Chow's own forward momentum to turn him 2 degrees off his original line while moving the man in the white shirt 6 inches to Chow's outside. He was now standing at Chow's right side. He raised his right hand. He brought it toward the right temple at a speed that the witnesses would describe variously as fast, as very fast, as faster than they had expected, as something they did not entirely see. The hand stopped 1 inch from Chow's temple. It stopped there. It did not touch. It was held in place at 1 inch for a period that Lamb later estimated at 2 full seconds. Raymond Chow did not move. He understood what had been given to him in those 2 seconds. He understood what the held hand meant. He understood what would have happened if the hand had continued. The man in the white shirt lowered his arm. He stepped back to the distance at which they had started. He put his hands at his sides. He looked at Chow. He said nothing. An older man named Wu Jianming, a teacher himself with a school in Shamshui-Po that had been operating for 11 years, was standing near the gate through which the man in the white shirt had entered. Wu had said nothing during what he had just observed. When the held strike was lowered, Wu stepped forward from his position at the gate. He walked toward the man in the white shirt. He reached out and placed his hand briefly on the man's left shoulder as he passed him toward the gate. He did not say anything either. The touch was the statement. Raymond Chow stood where he was. His breathing had normalized. His expression had not changed significantly. He was a man of genuine pride, which is different from vanity. And the pride of a man of that kind does not collapse immediately. It reorganizes. It seeks the shape of the thing it has encountered. The men along the walls were watching him do this. He had 2 options. Every man who has stood where he stood has had exactly these 2 options. He could say, "I see what I have not seen before." He could say, "There were conditions tonight that did not allow me to show what I have." Both statements are a kind of truth. Both reveal something. The choice between them is the moment when a man either grows past the boundary of what he was or confirms it. Chow looked at the man in the white shirt. He said, "You moved before I committed. How long have you been doing that?" The man in the white shirt said, "Since I was 13. Chow said, "I want to understand how that is learned." Then he said, "Tonight was not what I said it would be. I said something 3 weeks ago that was not worth saying. I am telling you that now." The man in the white shirt looked at him for a moment. He said, "Come to the school." Then he turned and walked back through the gate. He did not look at the men along the walls. He did not speak to anyone else. He left the courtyard the same way he had entered it, quietly, without ceremony, in plain clothes, with nothing in his hands. The courtyard was silent for several seconds after the gate closed. Then, George Lamb took his hands off the wall. In the days that followed, the men who had been in that courtyard talked. They talked in the way men who have witnessed something genuinely unexpected talk, carefully at first, then with more confidence as they found they agreed on what they had seen. The story moved from the courtyard to the gyms and dojos and training halls of Kowloon. It moved across the harbor to Hong Kong Island. It moved into the film community, where the man in the white shirt was beginning to be known for work that had started to attract attention beyond the local industry. It moved, as these things do, along the channels through which fighting men communicate, slowly and without formal mechanism, carrying the essential fact: the best fighter in the Mongkok circuits had gone to find out for himself. And what he had found had changed his answer. The story also changed as it moved, the way all stories change. By the time it had been told 10 times, the number of witnesses had grown from 14 to 30. By the time it had been told 30 times, the courtyard had been relocated to a rooftop. By the time it reached Macau, the encounter had lasted 11 seconds instead of 4 minutes. What remained constant across every version, through every telling in every venue where it was repeated, was one detail: the held strike, 1 inch from the temple, held for 2 seconds. Every version of the story kept that detail intact, because that detail was the story, not what was done, what was not done. Raymond Chow did go to the school on Hoi An Street. He went twice. He later described what he learned in both sessions as more useful than anything he had encountered in his previous 14 years of training. He did not say this to many people. He said it to Patrick Wei, who was with him in the courtyard, who later relayed it to George Lamb, who was the source through which it entered the record. He continued to fight for 3 more years before moving into coaching. He was not beaten in those 3 years, but he fought differently. Men who faced him after October of 1964 noticed that he had changed something about his distance management, that there was a new patience in the interval between exchanges, that he was harder to read at the moment of commitment. None of them knew why. He did not explain. The knowledge of where it came from was his to keep. Patrick Wei said, decades later, that what he saw in that courtyard in 1964 was not a fight. He said it was a demonstration. He said it was the most complete demonstration of something he could not name that he had ever witnessed. He said that the man in the white shirt had never appeared to hurry, and had never appeared to be in any danger at any point in the encounter, and that these 2 facts together were what had made it impossible to forget. He also said that he had never, in the years since, been able to explain to anyone who was not there exactly what he had seen, in a way that conveyed what it had felt like to be standing at that wall in that courtyard at 11:47 at night. He said the words were available for the actions, but not for the quality of the actions. He said there was a particular kind of mastery that does not translate into language and only translates into witnessing, and that if you were not there, the best you could do was a description, and descriptions were always wrong. He said, "I was there. I know what I saw. That is all I can tell you." George Lamb kept the memory in a different way. He wrote about it years later in a short document that was not intended for publication and was found among his papers after his death in 1988. He wrote that what he had seen in that courtyard was something he had only encountered once before in a different context on the opposite side of an experience, the moment when a man realizes, clearly and completely, that he is in the presence of something he did not know existed. He wrote that this realization, when it comes, is not unpleasant. He wrote that it feels, if he had to describe it, like relief. Wu Jianming, the older teacher who had touched the shoulder, added the encounter to what he taught, not as a story about who won, as a story about what is possible when a man has dedicated the appropriate number of years to the appropriate kind of attention. He taught it for the remaining 16 years of his instructional career. He taught it without naming the man in the white shirt, because he felt the name would make it about the man, and it was not about the man. It was about what the man had spent years becoming. The light in that courtyard, the one bulb that had burned out and not been replaced, was still burned out when the building was demolished in 1979 for a residential tower. The wire between the two iron hooks came down with the rest of it. The light that remained in the record was the other kind, the kind that does not require a bulb, that is passed from the men who were there to the men who hear about it from them, weakening slightly with each transmission but never entirely going out. What a man knows and what a man can do are not the same document. They are written in different languages. Most men spend their lives adding to the first one without ever opening the second. The ones who open both, and who spend the same years on each of them, become something that is hard to stand across from in a courtyard at midnight and easy to remember for the rest of a life. Raymond Chow understood that on a Tuesday night in October of 1964. He understood it 1 inch from his temple. Some knowledge comes through books. Some comes through practice. And some comes only when a man who has been certain about something stands in front of someone who will show him, without cruelty and without flourish, exactly how incomplete that certainty was. The lesson does not require many words. It does not require any injury. It requires only that the certain man be honest enough afterward to accept what he has been given. That is the hardest part. Not the receiving, the accepting. Next, we follow Bruce Lee to a film set in Los Angeles in 1971, where a stuntman with a decorated amateur boxing record made a remark about choreography that he would later call the most expensive opinion he ever expressed. That story is coming. Make sure you are here for it.